Hey everyone, I'm Kareem, the Alumni Officer at CIBS, and welcome to CIBS Connect, a brand new interview series which will cover insightful topics including experiences within finance, diversity and inclusion, application tips, and many, many more. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Christopher Lipscomb, a Managing Director at Morgan Stanley. So, Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on here, Kareem.
No problem at all. So I guess if we were to go straight into the questions, really, I'd like to go in chronological order and then throw in a few broader questions in between. So my first question to yourself is, I noticed that you studied philosophy at Cambridge University. So it'd be very interesting to know why you chose to study philosophy and what initially sparked your interest in investment banking and the capital markets in particular.
Absolutely. So look, I studied philosophy because it interested me. It's the classic, I guess, Cambridge interview question. Why are you coming here to study philosophy? And you've got to have a good answer. But for me, it really interested me. I did a fairly diverse group of A-levels, lots of maths, French and music. And wow. So it was pretty disparate. And I fancied the kind of, I guess, diverse opportunities that a philosophy degree would afford. And and drawing on some of the kind of technical, logical aspects of the maths while being able to dip into some of the kind of more artistic and just artistic sides of the kind of French and music that I'd enjoyed. And it was great. It was a great balance between that. It was a very sort of flexible degree and great fun.
No, that's great. And what then sparked your interest in investment banking and capital markets from your time at Cambridge then?
Well, it's interesting because I don't think I've met too many philosophers that have gone into banking. But one of the beauties of our degree system in this country is that it's pretty flexible, and particularly with a Cambridge degree, you're given the benefit of an amazing education in terms of being able to being taught how to put together constructive arguments, articulate your point of view, and actually the technical aspects of what's required in an investment banking job. That's something that you can pick up, on the job to some extent. So although I wasn't using my philosophy degree day to day in investment banking, I was using a lot of the skills around arguments and persuasion and so on that I developed through the degree in the day-to-day of my banking job. What attracted me to banking really was the ability to work in a fast-paced environment where there were other like-minded driven people around, working on big things that sort of seemed to matter and seemed to affect the way the world worked. And being part of something which was a sort of highly engaging and enterprising process. And there are probably a few careers that you could look at which tick those boxes, but for me, with my skill set, I felt that banking was the most applicable. And the people that I spoke to who worked in the industry were very engaging and encouraging in that way. And so I thought I'd like to give it a shot. I wasn't dead set on banking as opposed to any other industry in particular, but as I kind of went down the path of finding out more about it, I became more interested, and I sort of ended up with a job in it, and I've had a really fulfilling last sort of 17, 18 years in the industry.
No, definitely. That's a great and very insightful insight into what made you go into investment banking. And I guess going on from that, coming straight out of university, then you began your career at HSBC. So it would be great if you could elaborate on why you chose to start your career at HSBC, how you managed to get that role, and provide some background on your time there.
Well, look, I had an unconventional approach into banking. I was actually a choral scholar at King's, and no one could understand why I hadn't had the time to do an internship. And I left university basically looking for a full-time job and without the benefit of an internship under my belt, and actually made life quite tough in terms of securing a job, because the internship is was and still represents the best route into the industry. It's the best way for prospective candidates to experience what life is like on the inside, and it's the best way for the firm to get a handle on whether that candidate is the right person for the job. So I was there, I guess, woefully unprepared back in 2004, as I left university in search of a job. And actually also, back in 2004, we just come off, I guess, some fairly traumatic economic times in 2003. I think 2003 was at the time, one of the worst job markets around. So I sort of left not having had the opportunities to do an internship and figuring out what I wanted to do next. And actually, I found that HSBC were recruiting direct through the Cambridge alumni, the Cambridge website, I think. So I thought, well, this looks good. Let's give it a go. And I really enjoyed the people that I met there. They seemed driven and smart. And I was hired to a desk in their corporate investment banking markets division, which was called a derivative sales desk. I knew nothing about derivatives. But so it was a very, very steep learning curve for me, but that was extremely fun and challenging, and at times very worrying. But it was great. And I spent 3 years there. I learned an enormous amount there. It was a great place to learn because the flow of the deals that they were doing in that space was enormous. They have vast. They had a vast kind of footprint with clients, and there was a lot of kind of execution flow that as a junior it was brilliant to kind of get in that flow. And I had a great time there.
No, definitely. That sounds like a very steep learning curve, very interactive, and learning new things on the job. I guess that's what you're looking for in a career in finance, and especially in investment banking. So my question then, moving on from that, is what made you make the switch then from HSBC to Morgan Stanley? And what is it about Morgan Stanley which has influenced you to stay for over 14 years? We know that investment banking can be a very demanding career, but you've been able to stay there for over 14 years. So it'd be very interesting to hear your insights on that.
Yeah, so look, back in 2007 when I made the switch, the market was hot. It was really hot, and there were loads of cool M&A transactions going on. And while I was doing some interesting stuff, it was quite niche at HSBC, and it was always linked to the firm's lending and the extension of the firm's balance sheet. And I sort of felt that I wanted to be involved in more transactions around the firm's ability to deliver IP and M&A advice and kind of interesting stuff around actual corporate transactions, rather than just stuff that was sort of loan linked or balance sheet linked. And my boss at HSBC had moved to Morgan Stanley, and I remember sending him a text message at the time saying, "Wow, great move, good job, congratulations." And I found myself 6 months later with the opportunity to work under him, and it's I guess this is something that's characterized my experience of this industry, which is it's really important to get sponsors, and you never know who your sponsor might turn out to be or what opportunities might open up to you, and that kind of goes to basically trying to do your best every day you come into work, because you never know what options might be available. So there came this option to work at Morgan Stanley, which was on every deal, right, on every M&A deal that I could see, working on some of the coolest stuff. And I thought, well, I could use some of the the techno know-how that I've developed at HSBC and my pretty strong technical grounding and execution experience, and apply that in a setting which is perhaps a little more dynamic with regard to all of the M&A that's going on in the world right now, back in 2007. And that could be pretty exciting, and it was for a short period of time. And then there was the financial crisis, and then it got really exciting. So what's made me stay at Morgan Stanley is I'd say that the challenge of it, and the fact that I learned something new every day. I still learn something new after 14 years every day. the job and the institution hasn't stayed still at all. The kind of what's happened in the industry over the last since 2008 is enormous. The developments that have happened, and particularly in the area within which I work, the amount of regulation that's come through and the barriers to business and banks pulling in and out of the space. It's been really kind of challenging to stay on top of it all, but a good challenge. And it's meant that we've had to kind of grow and shape our business in different ways to make sure that we're still competitive and able to deliver what our clients need us to deliver. So that's really, it's the challenge that's made me stay at Morgan Stanley. And my job has gone from being someone that's I guess focused around executing the nitty-gritty of a transaction through to being the person that's really leading the transaction, through to being the person that's leading a team of people leading different transactions and building that team and making sure that team works. So the evolution in my own role has kept me really interested, and the way that we've had to adapt in the changing market has kept me interested too. And it's been great to be part of a journey where, I think specifically my team has gone from being something which is a relatively small part of our organization into being something which is really, really kind of cool and critical to what the firm is doing today in the market.
No, thank you for that. That's very interesting experience that you've had over the past 14 years, and even beyond that, starting your career at HSBC, and the differences that you've noticed within the industry, within the firm, and the fact that it's a very rewarding career at the end of the day. So I guess changing tack slightly then. So we know that investment banking, as you mentioned, is very high pressure, demanding yet rewarding career. What sorts of activities do you enjoy doing outside of work? And I guess the key question here is, how do you go about integrating those activities into such a busy work schedule? I know that a lot of the students here will be thinking about going into such a career, but how do you go about integrating those things, those fun activities, into your everyday life?
Well, it's a challenge, but there's more to life than just work, right? And you've got to be you're kind of a work to live person or a live to work person. But for me, I think it's important to appreciate what's going on outside work as well. And it's going to sound really corny, but Morgan Stanley, I think, does a good job in recognizing that people can only be their best at work if they're happy and relaxed and they've got a life outside it. And so, keeping a balance, I think, is a really important thing. What do I like doing? Well, I guess it's sort of varied a little bit over the years, given my given the time that I've got to sort of expend outside work. But I guess my real passions are cycling. So I'm a proper middle-aged man in Lycra, probably. I love my cycling, and I try and do a bit on the watt bike every day. That's my little treat to myself. So I try and get that done at the beginning of the day. Puts me in a better mood. And then the other passion of mine is music. And I mentioned I was a choral scholar at King's. I love continuing to try and do bits and pieces of music. It happens now more vicariously through my kids, but it's it's something that I definitely come to really. It's been an important part of my life, and I try and do it as much as I can. It is tough though, fitting this stuff in, and it requires an understanding partner and family to try and keep a balance between what's going on at work, how you kind of how much time you're able to give to the family, and what you want to do for yourself, and that's a constant juggling act, but one where it's important to find a really happy balance.
No, that sounds great. And I hope that you can continue with your cycling, your music, and very interesting hobbies indeed that you've got there, and the fact that you've been able to keep on top of it for the sustained period of time. So I guess moving then back towards your sort of role at Morgan Stanley then. Over your career, I guess Morgan Stanley and HSBC, could you provide some of the examples of some of the interesting projects or transactions that you've worked on, or any of the very rewarding things that you've been able to achieve over your career within the finance industry?
Yeah, so look, I mean, worked on a whole bunch of interesting stuff. And I remember, when I was back at university, hearing people speak about things that they have or haven't done, and it was always very generic. So I apologize if this is too generic, but some of the stuff that I have done, and I will drop some names because some of it is definitely in the public domain. Some of the stuff I found really rewarding to work on has been where I've been part of that bigger team at Morgan Stanley on a bigger transaction, and kind of this goes back to what I was saying as one of my key motivating reasons for moving to Morgan Stanley in the first place was getting involved in those cool M&A transactions. And we were working on a trade in the last year or so, which was a buy side. So we were buying a company based in the UK, but we were working for a non-UK buyer, and it was a public company in the UK. And when you buy a public company in the UK, you need to represent to the UK takeover panel that you've got enough money to pay for the transaction. They don't want anyone just pitching up and saying, "Sure, I can buy that asset, no problem." You need to demonstrate that you've got the financing. And if you're a foreign buyer, that's quite tough because ordinarily, I mean, I guess regularly, your financing and sources of financing are going to be in a non-sterling currency, yet you're going to have to show committed funds in sterling. So there's some kind of mechanism usually by which you need to address the fact that sterling could appreciate versus the funds that you're raising. So if you're raising funds in dollars and sterling suddenly appreciates, you're not going to have enough funds. So how do you address that fact? And we were working in a situation where we had someone that was buying a multi-billion-pound asset and needed some certainty around the FX rate at which they were going to be able to convert their non-sterling capital into sterling. The problem with that, of course, is if you enter into a contract to fix your FX rate, and then the deal doesn't go ahead, and sterling's moved, you could have a lot of expense in closing out that contract, and that's usually a completely unacceptable expense for a prospective M&A participant to bear, like a deal break scenario. So we ended up transacting with them an FX forward, something which locked their FX rate on multi-billion pounds, but we did it in a way where if the deal were to fail, Morgan Stanley would absorb the unwind costs of that contract. And that became the delivery of that was, it was very, very complex transaction because these things happen in the market in small size. It's very rare that you do something in such big size because the potential exposure under these deals could be massive. And Morgan Stanley could have been on the hook for $1 billion loss in the event of a deal failure. So trying to find a way to get the firm comfortable with taking that risk and so on is was important. And also being able to deliver the firm to do that transaction was really important to even being able to announce the transaction in the first place. So we were there working with our M&A colleagues, our colleagues in equity capital markets, colleagues, the CFO at the client, treasurer at the client, so everybody pulling together to try and make this thing announce. And we got there on it. I'm pleased to announce that the deal happened. They raised the money successfully. The deal closed, and so it was a happy ending. But it was months of work and a big team pulling together across many different aspects of financing, M&A advice, and so on to get it done. I guess a couple of other trades that I've worked on which are interesting, maybe a bit more kind of niche and bespoke to my department, but I got introduced to the BBC as a client about 5 or 6 years ago, and we did a really interesting transaction with them where they had some very high costs to occupying their beautiful central London headquarters, new broadcasting house, and we were able to develop a strategy for them whereby they were able to effectively spread the costs of the occupancy over a much longer period of time. They originally, under the transaction that they locked in on that financing, they had quite high costs for the next 12 years and then really low costs for a sort of subsequent period. and so what we were able to do was a derivative transaction with them, actually, where we stripped out a bunch of inflation risk that they had, and we were able to smooth the their transaction costs or their building occupancy costs over a much longer period of time. It ended up saving them around 10, 15 million pounds a year in the near term, which they can, you know, deploy on program making and the like. And that was super interesting because, you know, it was working with government, it was working with, you know, the DCMS, Department for Culture, Media and Sport. It was working with you know, with the Deputy Director General at the BBC. It was really interesting and cool. Different type of client. It was a different type of challenge. And then probably finally, the other one that I worked on in recent history was actually for the University of Cambridge itself. We did a bond raising for Cambridge, which was for the development of the Northwest Cambridge site, originally back in 2012, and then we did a subsequent bond issue several years later. The subsequent one was perhaps even more interesting because the university was looking to borrow actually on an inflation-linked basis, and so we did I think what was one of the largest CPI inflation-linked bonds at the time, back for the University of Cambridge. So it was quite fun to come and work for my alma mater and you know, sell the credit story to investors around Cambridge and explain and educate investors on what Cambridge was going to do with the proceeds. And it was a landmark transaction in terms of the sort of first foray, I think, into the CPI market of a major issuer. So yeah, lots of different experiences over the years.
No, thank you for that. Very interesting transactions that you've been able to work on over the past 14 years, really, and beyond. So I guess my final question to yourself is, given that a large proportion of the viewers will be university students, do you have any tips or advice for students looking to break into the industry?
Well, look, I think you're doing a good job by watching this video for a start, obviously. I think get as much information as you can from people, speak to as many people as you can. Try and get an idea as to, you know, if it's something for you. Because if it's not something for you, then I'm telling you, it's probably not worth doing. It is a strong commitment. It is hard work, but hard work can be fun and rewarding if you know, if it's what sort of floats your boat. So, you know, I would encourage you to spend as much time as you can researching, trying to speak to people, going to events. It's a horrible phrase to say networking, but that's basically what that means. It means trying to understand what motivates the people that work in that industry today. You know, what kind of stuff they've been doing. Does that sound interesting? Does you know, could you see yourself doing that thing? Just try and get an idea of it. And I think that's the best way to de-risk a path into the industry and to see if it's for you.
No, perfect. Thank you for those words of advice. I'm sure it'll resonate really, really nicely with a lot of the students watching this, interview. So those were all the questions we have time for today. Thank you, Chris, on behalf of CIBS, for taking up the time to participate in this interview. We very much appreciate this, and I'm sure that all the viewers watching this interview will find it extremely beneficial.
Great. Thanks, Karim.
Thank you.